My roommate swore she believed me about the break-in until I found messages where she'd given my stalker our security codes. I woke up at 2:43 in the morning to the sound of someone trying my bedroom door handle. The knob twisted slowly, deliberately, like whoever was on the other side didn't want to wake me, but couldn't resist checking if the door was locked. My heart slammed against my ribs as I grabbed my phone from the nightstand and pulled up the emergency call screen, my thumb hovering over the numbers. The handle stopped moving. Silence pressed against my ears until I could hear my own pulse. Then footsteps retreated down the hallway, slow and measured, before the apartment's front door opened and closed with a soft click that might have been my imagination if I hadn't been holding my breath waiting for it. I sat frozen in my bed for 20 minutes before I could move. When I finally unlocked my bedroom door and stepped into the hallway, everything looked exactly as it had when I'd gone to sleep. The living room was undisturbed. Our second-hand couch still pushed against the wall, the coffee table exactly where it belonged. I checked the front door and found it locked with both the deadbolt and chain engaged, exactly how I'd left them before bed. My roommate Kira's bedroom door was closed with light showing underneath. She was awake. I knocked softly, and her voice came through immediately, asking who it was. When I told her it was me, she opened the door looking perfectly alert in her pajamas, her laptop open on her bed behind her. "Did you hear someone in the apartment just now?" I kept my voice low, even though we were alone. Kira's face shifted into concern, and she shook her head, stepping out into the hallway with me. "I've been up working on a presentation for tomorrow. I didn't hear anything." "What happened?" I explained about the door handle and the footsteps and the sound of the front door closing. As I spoke, Kira's expression moved from concern to skeptical, her eyebrows drawing together in that way that made me feel like I was overreacting before she'd even said anything. "Are you sure you weren't dreaming? Sometimes sleep paralysis can feel really real." I told her I'd been fully awake, that I'd grabbed my phone and watched the door handle move. She glanced at my bedroom door, then back at me with sympathy that felt more patronizing than genuine. "The front door is locked, though. Both locks. I checked them before I started working because I always do. Nobody could have gotten in without a key, and nobody left because I would have heard it from my room." Her logic made sense, but I knew what I'd experienced. I'd been awake, I'd seen the handle turn, I'd heard footsteps and the door closing. Kira put her hand on my shoulder and suggested I try to get some sleep. That stress from my new job was probably making me jumpy. She'd been saying things like that a lot lately, attributing my concerns to stress or anxiety or exhaustion, as if I couldn't trust my own perceptions. I went back to my room and locked the door again, but I didn't sleep. I sat against my headboard with all the lights on until dawn started filtering through my curtains. At breakfast, Kira acted like nothing had happened. She made coffee and toast and talked about her presentation at the marketing firm where she worked, asking if I wanted to hear her practice her pitch. I was a financial analyst at an investment company, 6 months into my first real job after grad school, and Kira had been my roommate for 8 months. We'd met through a housing website when I'd moved to the city and needed someone to split rent with. She'd seemed perfect at first, organized and friendly and easy to live with. Lately, though, small things had started feeling off. She'd ask detailed questions about my schedule, wanting to know exactly when I'd be home and where I was going. She'd mention things I'd told her weeks ago as if she'd been taking notes. She'd rearrange my things and claim she was just tidying up. I didn't tell anyone at work about the incident that night. What would I say? Someone tried my door handle, but nothing was taken and my roommate didn't hear anything? It sounded paranoid even to me. But 3 nights later, it happened again. I woke up at 3:17 in the morning to the same careful testing of my bedroom door handle. This time I didn't just grab my phone. I jumped out of bed and yanked the door open, ready to confront whoever was there. The hallway was empty. The front door was closed. Kira's bedroom light was off. I stood there in the darkness feeling insane, my hand still on my doorknob, wondering if I really was dreaming or losing my mind. Then I noticed something I'd missed before. A faint smell in the air, cologne or aftershave, something masculine that didn't belong in our apartment. I knocked on Kira's door harder this time. It took almost a minute before she answered, her hair messed up and her eyes squinting against the hallway light I'd turned on. "What's wrong?" Her voice was thick with sleep, annoyed rather than concerned. I told her about the door handle again, about the smell, about how this was the second time and something was wrong. Kira rubbed her face and sighed in a way that made it clear she thought I was being ridiculous. "I don't smell anything, and I was asleep, so obviously I didn't hear anything. Maybe you should talk to someone about these nightmares. They're getting worse." The way she said nightmares instead of incidents made my stomach tighten. She wasn't believing me. She was categorizing my experiences as problems with my mental state rather than problems with our security. I called the police the next morning from my office, using a conference room so my coworkers wouldn't overhear. The officer who took my report sounded bored and skeptical, asking what had been stolen or damaged. When I said nothing, that someone was just getting into the apartment and trying my bedroom door, he asked if I had any proof. Security camera footage, witnesses, signs of forced entry. I had none of those things. He took down my information and said they'd send an officer by to take a statement, but his tone suggested this was a waste of everyone's time. The officer who came to the apartment that afternoon was a woman in her 40s named Detective Lorraine Vasquez, who actually listened when I explained what had been happening. She checked the front door, the windows, all the locks. Everything looked secure. No scratches on the locks, no signs of tampering. Do you have any idea who might want to access your apartment? I did have an idea, but saying it out loud felt like crossing a line into paranoia I couldn't come back from. 6 months ago, I dated a guy named Craig Donovan for 3 months before breaking things off. He'd been charming at first, attentive and interested in everything about me. Then he'd become possessive. He'd show up at my office unannounced. He'd text me dozens of times a day asking where I was and who I was with. When I'd ended things, he'd taken it badly. He'd sent long messages about how I was making a mistake, how we were meant to be together, how he couldn't imagine his life without me. Then he'd started showing up places he knew I'd be. Coffee shops, the gym, my favorite lunch spot. I'd blocked his number and social media accounts after he'd appeared outside my apartment building one night, standing on the sidewalk staring up at my window. That had been 2 months ago, and I hadn't seen him since. I'd started to believe he'd finally moved on. But now, with the door handle incidents and the cologne smell, I couldn't stop thinking about him. Detective Vasquez wrote down Craig's full name and asked if I had any recent evidence of contact or threats. I pulled up my blocked messages and showed her the last texts he'd sent before I'd cut off communication. They were desperate and pleading, but not overtly threatening, nothing that would constitute harassment by legal standards. Vasquez took photos of the messages and said she'd do a wellness check on Craig, confirm his whereabouts, see if he had an alibi for the nights in question. Kira came home while Vasquez was still there, and her expression shifted from surprise to something else when she saw the detective in our living room. She was overly friendly, offering coffee and asking what was going on with exaggerated concern. When I explained I'd filed a police report about the break-ins, Kira's face went through a complicated series of expressions before settling on supportive worry that felt rehearsed. I wish you'd talk to me before involving the police. I'm sure there's a logical explanation. Vasquez picked up on the tension and asked Kira directly if she'd heard or seen anything unusual lately. Kira shook her head and said she was a heavy sleeper, that she often wore earplugs because I snored, which was a lie. I didn't snore, and she'd never mentioned earplugs before. After Vasquez left, Kira confronted me about calling the police without telling her first. This is my apartment too. If you're going to bring cops here and make our landlord think we have security problems, I deserve a heads up. Her reaction felt all wrong, defensive when she should have been worried, angry when she should have been scared. I told her I was sorry, but I needed to feel safe in my own home, and if someone was getting in, we needed to figure out how. Kira said she thought I was blowing things out of proportion, that maybe I should consider finding a new place if I was so uncomfortable here. The suggestion landed between us with unexpected weight. She wanted me to leave. After 8 months of living together, she was suggesting I move out because I'd reported feeling unsafe. That night, I couldn't sleep at all. I sat up in bed with my laptop researching security cameras and smart locks, anything that would give me proof of what was happening. I ordered a small camera that looked like a phone charger and paid for overnight shipping. It would record to a cloud server and send alerts to my phone when it detected motion. I also ordered a deadbolt that could only be locked and unlocked from the inside, something that would work even if someone else had a key. When the packages arrived the next day, I installed everything while Kira was at work. The camera went in the hallway pointing at my bedroom door, plugged into an outlet that looked like it was just charging my phone. The deadbolt replaced my existing bedroom lock with one that couldn't be opened from the hallway side, even with a key. Kira noticed the new lock immediately when she got home. She stood in my doorway staring at it with an expression I couldn't read. That's pretty extreme. Are you that scared of me? The question felt like a trap. I told her it wasn't about her, it was about whoever was getting into the apartment. She laughed, short and bitter, and said I was being paranoid, that my ex-boyfriend Craig was probably miles away living his life and I was creating drama out of nothing. The way she said Craig's name made something click in my mind. I'd never told Kira my ex's name. I'd mentioned I had an ex who'd been clingy, but I'd never given her details. We weren't close friends who shared that kind of information. We were roommates who split bills and made small talk about work. How do you know my ex's name? Kira's face froze for just a second before recovering. You must have mentioned it. Or I saw it on your phone or something when you were showing me those texts. But I hadn't shown her any texts. The only texts I'd shown anyone were to Detective Vasquez, and that had been after Kira came home. I felt ice spreading through my chest as I processed what this meant. Kira knew Craig's name. She knew about him. And she was lying about how she knew. I closed my bedroom door and locked the new deadbolt, hearing it click into place with solid finality. Through the door, Kira called out that I was overreacting, that we needed to talk about this like adults. I didn't answer. I sat on my bed and opened my laptop, pulling up the security camera app I'd installed that morning. The camera had been recording for 8 hours. I scrolled through the footage at high speed, watching empty hallway, Kira walking past a few times. Nothing unusual. Then I reached the timestamp from 3 nights ago, the night I'd installed the camera. At 2:51 in the morning, motion triggered the recording. A man appeared in the hallway outside my bedroom door. He was tall with dark hair, wearing jeans and a jacket. Craig. He walked up to my door and tried the handle, found it locked with the new deadbolt, and stood there for almost 30 seconds just staring at the door. Then he walked back down the hallway toward the living room and disappeared from frame. The camera had captured everything. I had proof. I wasn't crazy. I wasn't imagining things. Someone really had been trying to get into my room. I downloaded the video file and sent it to Detective Vasquez immediately, my hands shaking so hard I could barely type the email. Then I kept watching. Craig appeared again at 3:15 in the morning, testing the door handle one more time before leaving. The camera caught his face clearly this time. It was definitely him. But what made my blood go cold was what happened after he left. 5 minutes later, Kira's bedroom door opened. She walked out into the hallway in her pajamas and stood exactly where Craig had been standing, looking at my door. She pulled out her phone and typed something. A minute later, she went back to her room. The timestamp said 3:20 in the morning. The same night, she'd answered her door claiming she'd been asleep when I'd knocked at 3:17. She'd been awake. She'd known someone was in the apartment. And she'd lied directly to my face about it. I felt sick. My roommate, the person I trusted to split rent and share a living space with, had been lying to me about intruders in our apartment. I kept watching the footage, going back through the previous days. There were more clips I'd missed on first viewing. Craig appearing in the hallway at different times, always late at night, always trying my door. And after each visit, Kira would emerge from her room with her phone, typing messages, checking that he'd left. She was communicating with him. My roommate was in contact with my stalker ex-boyfriend and lying about it. I needed more evidence before I confronted her. I opened a new browser window and logged into our apartment building's security portal, something our landlord had set up 6 months ago when they'd installed new cameras in the common areas. I'd never bothered checking it before. I entered my credentials and pulled up footage from the building's front entrance, filtering by date to match the nights I'd been woken up. The footage showed Craig entering the building at 2:38 in the morning 5 nights ago. The door opened for him without any buzzer code. Someone had let him in. I watched him walk through the lobby and head for the stairs. Then I switched to the hallway camera outside our apartment. Craig walked up to our door and pulled out a key. He had a key to our apartment. He unlocked the door and went inside. My mind was racing through implications. Craig had a key. Someone had given him a key. The only other person with a key was Kira, or our landlord. But why would the landlord give my ex-boyfriend access to our apartment? It had to be Kira. She'd given him a key. She'd been letting him into our home. I thought about all the times she'd asked detailed questions about my schedule, when I'd be working late, when I had plans on weekends. She'd been feeding him information. I thought about how she'd been so skeptical of my reports about someone being in the apartment, dismissing my concerns as nightmares and paranoia. She'd been gaslighting me, making me doubt my own perceptions while actively helping my stalker access me. I grabbed my phone and called Detective Vasquez. It was almost 8 at night, but she answered after 3 rings. I explained about the camera footage, about Kira's lies, about the building security showing Craig with a key. Vasquez listened without interrupting and then said, "I'm coming over right now. Don't confront your roommate. Don't tell her you know anything. Just stay in your room with the door locked until I get there." She arrived 20 minutes later with another officer, a younger man named Officer Dennis Liu. I let them into my room through my newly secured door and showed them everything. The camera footage, the building security videos, the timeline of events. Vasquez's expression grew darker as she watched. "This is stalking and criminal trespass. We have enough here to arrest Craig and potentially charge your roommate as an accomplice." She asked if Kira was home, and I said yes. She was in her room. Vasquez instructed Officer Liu to secure the front door while she knocked on Kira's bedroom. I stood in my doorway listening as Vasquez identified herself and asked Kira to come out. There was a long pause before Kira opened her door, looking confused and worried in a performance that might have been convincing if I hadn't just watched footage of her coordinating with my stalker. Vasquez asked Kira to sit down in the living room and explain her relationship with Craig Donovan. Kira's face went pale. She claimed she didn't know anyone named Craig, that she'd never heard that name before. Vasquez pulled out her phone and showed Kira a photo of Craig from his driver's license. "This man has been entering your apartment multiple times over the past 2 weeks using a key. Building security footage shows him coming and going. We also have footage from inside the apartment showing him attempting to access your roommate's bedroom. We need to know how he got the key and why you didn't report his presence." Kira's performance crumbled. She started crying, saying she didn't know what I was talking about, that she'd been asleep during those times, that she couldn't help what happened when she wasn't aware. Vasquez cut through the manipulation by pulling up the hallway camera footage on my laptop. She played the clip of Kira emerging after Craig's visit, texting on her phone, clearly awake and aware. "You're on camera. You were awake. You were communicating with someone. We can subpoena your phone records and text messages. I'm giving you one chance to tell the truth before this becomes obstruction of justice." Kira's tears stopped. Her expression shifted into something harder and uglier. "Fine. Craig contacted me a few months ago. He wanted to talk to someone who knew her, who could help him understand why she was being so cruel to him. He's a nice guy who made some mistakes. He deserved a chance to apologize. So yes, I gave him the spare key. I let him in a few times, but I never thought he'd actually go into her room. I thought he just wanted to see where she lived, to feel close to her again. When I realized he was trying her door, I told him to stop. I felt my entire body go cold. Kira had given my stalker ex-boyfriend a key to our apartment. She'd let him come inside while I was sleeping, let him try to get into my room, and then lied to my face about it. She'd made me think I was going crazy while actively enabling someone to terrorize me. Vasquez was staring at Kira with barely controlled anger. You gave a known stalker access to your roommate's home. You coordinated with him and concealed his presence. You lied to police during an active investigation. You're under arrest for conspiracy to commit stalking and obstruction of justice. The officer moved forward with handcuffs, and Kira started yelling that I was overreacting, that Craig was harmless, that I was ruining her life over nothing. She was still yelling when they walked her out of the apartment. I stood in the living room we'd shared for 8 months feeling like I was in a stranger's home. Detective Vasquez stayed behind to take my full statement. She explained that Craig would be arrested within the hour, that they had his address from his driver's license and officers were already en route. She said both Craig and Kira would face criminal charges, and I should expect to testify at their trials. She also said I needed to find a new place to live immediately, that staying in this apartment wasn't safe even with Kira arrested. I nodded, trying to process everything. My roommate had betrayed me. My ex-boyfriend had been stalking me with her help. I'd been living in a situation designed to make me doubt my own reality. Vasquez handed me a card for a victim services organization that could help with emergency housing and legal advocacy. What you experienced is called intimate partner violence by proxy. Your ex used your roommate to maintain access to you after you'd cut him off. It's calculated and predatory. This isn't your fault. Her words should have been comforting, but they just made me feel violated in a new way. Craig hadn't been acting alone. He'd recruited someone from my daily life, someone I trusted with my home and my safety. I asked Vasquez why Kira would help him. What did she have to gain? Vasquez said sometimes people got pulled into these situations through manipulation, believing they were helping reunite a couple or fix a misunderstanding. Sometimes they got paid. Sometimes they just enjoyed the power of having secret knowledge. I called my older brother Andrew after Vasquez left. He lived across the city and we weren't particularly close, but he was the only family I had nearby. I explained what had happened in clinical detail, keeping my voice steady through sheer force of will. Andrew was silent for a long moment before saying, "Pack a bag. I'm coming to get you right now. You're staying with me until we figure this out." He arrived 40 minutes later and helped me pack essentials while I explained everything I'd discovered. Andrew kept stopping to stare at me with an expression caught between rage and horror. Your roommate gave your stalker a key to your apartment. That's not just betrayal, that's criminal conspiracy. How long has this been going on? I didn't know. That was the worst part. I had no idea how long Craig had been coming and going. The camera had only been installed for 3 days. He could have been accessing the apartment for weeks or months before I'd noticed. I thought about all the times I'd felt like things in my room were slightly off. Items moved just enough to notice, but not enough to be sure. I'd attributed it to memory mistakes or Kira tidying up. Now I understood that Craig had been in my space, touching my things, invading my privacy in ways I couldn't even quantify. Andrew loaded my bags into his car and we drove to his apartment in silence. I felt numb, shocked beyond the capacity for emotional processing. At Andrew's place, he set me up in his guest room and made tea neither of us wanted. His wife Gabrielle came home from her nursing shift and hugged me without asking questions, seeming to understand that I needed comfort more than conversation. Over the next few days, I lived in a strange suspension between my normal life and crisis mode. I went to work and performed my job. I came home to Andrew's apartment and existed. Detective Vasquez called to inform me that Craig had been arrested and charged with stalking, criminal trespass, and harassment. His bail had been set at $50,000 and he was currently in custody. Kira had been released on her own recognizance but faced similar charges. The district attorney was building cases against both of them. I hired an attorney named David Brennan, who specialized in stalking cases. He was recommended by the Victim Services Organization, and he listened to my entire story without interruption before explaining my legal options. I could pursue protective orders against both Craig and Kira. I could sue them civilly for damages related to emotional distress and violation of privacy. I could testify at their criminal trials and provide victim impact statements at sentencing. Brennan recommended all of these actions. He said perpetrators rarely faced meaningful consequences unless their victims pushed for accountability. I agreed to everything. I wanted Craig and Kira to understand that what they'd done wasn't a misunderstanding or a mistake. It was deliberate violation that would follow them into their futures. The protective order hearings happened within 2 weeks. Craig appeared via video from jail looking thinner and more disheveled than I remembered. His attorney argued that he'd never intended to harm me, that he'd only wanted closure and had used poor judgment in how he sought it. The judge wasn't impressed. She granted a 5-year protective order prohibiting Craig from any contact with me, direct or indirect, and requiring him to stay at least 500 feet away from my home, workplace, and known locations. Kira's hearing was in person. She showed up in a conservative dress with her hair pulled back, looking nothing like the casual roommate I'd known. Her attorney tried to paint her as a naive friend who'd been manipulated by Craig's sob story about lost love. Brennan destroyed that narrative by presenting the timeline of communications between Kira and Craig, showing how she'd provided detailed information about my schedule and routines. Text messages recovered from Kira's phone included her telling Craig what time I usually went to bed, when I worked from home, when I'd be out for the evening. She'd actively coordinated his access. The judge granted a 5-year protective order against Kira as well, and added that she was disappointed someone would betray a roommate's trust so thoroughly. Afterward, Kira tried to approach me in the courthouse hallway. Security stopped her before she got close, but I heard her calling out that she was sorry, that Craig had lied to her too, that she'd never meant for things to go this far. Her apology sounded like image management rather than genuine remorse. The criminal trial was scheduled for 4 months later. In the meantime, I moved into a 1-bedroom apartment by myself in a building with actual security and a doorman. I paid more than I could comfortably afford, but the safety was worth the financial strain. I installed cameras inside my apartment and smart locks that sent notifications to my phone whenever someone entered. I started seeing a therapist who specialized in trauma and violation of trust. She helped me process the betrayal, understand that Kira's actions weren't my fault, recognize the red flags I'd missed. I kept working at my job but requested a transfer to a different floor with restricted access after discovering that Craig had been researching the company building layout online. 3 months after the arrests, my attorney called with news. Craig had accepted a plea deal. He'd pleaded guilty to stalking and criminal trespass in exchange for 18 months in jail and 3 years probation. When he was released, he'd be required to register as a stalking offender and continue the protective order terms. Brennan said it was a reasonable outcome given the evidence, though he knew I might have wanted more time. I asked about Kira, and he said her case was still proceeding. She'd refused a plea deal and was insisting on trial, apparently convinced she could persuade a jury she'd been manipulated. Brennan thought she was making a mistake. The evidence against her was overwhelming, and juries rarely sympathized with people who enabled stalkers. Kira's trial happened on a cold morning in November. I testified for almost 3 hours, walking through the timeline of events, the gaslighting, the lies, the coordination with Craig. Kira's attorney tried to discredit me by suggesting I was paranoid and had created this narrative to justify breaking our lease. Brennan countered with the security footage, the text messages, the documented timeline showing Kira's active participation. The prosecution brought in an expert witness who explained how stalkers often recruit third parties to maintain access to victims who've blocked them. She testified that Kira's behavior fit a clear pattern of conspiracy and enablement. The jury deliberated for 6 hours before returning a guilty verdict on conspiracy to commit stalking and obstruction of justice. Sentencing happened 2 weeks later. I submitted a victim impact statement that I'd written and rewritten dozens of times, trying to capture the violation of having someone I trusted betray me so completely. I explained how I'd questioned my own sanity, how I'd felt unsafe in my own home, how I now struggled to trust new people or form roommate relationships. I described the financial burden of breaking my lease and moving, the therapy costs, the legal fees, the way this experience had infected every aspect of my life. The judge read my statement aloud in court and then sentenced Kira to 14 months in jail and 3 years probation. She also ordered Kira to pay restitution for my moving costs, therapy bills, and legal fees. The total came to over $30,000. Kira sobbed when the sentence was announced. Her parents were in the courtroom and they glared at me as if I'd done something wrong by holding their daughter accountable. I didn't feel triumph or satisfaction watching her cry. I just felt tired, exhausted by the process of proving what had happened, of making people understand that this wasn't an overreaction or a misunderstanding. After the sentencing, Brennan told me the civil suit could move forward now that the criminal case was resolved. We could pursue additional damages for emotional distress and punitive damages meant to punish particularly egregious behavior. I told him to proceed. I wanted Kira to understand that actions had consequences, that you couldn't enable someone's stalker and walk away unscathed. The civil trial took place 8 months after Kira's criminal conviction. By then, I'd rebuilt my life into something stable if not entirely trusting. I'd made friends at my new apartment building and started dating someone who respected my boundaries and understood why I needed transparency. I'd reduced my therapy sessions from weekly to monthly. I'd even adopted a dog, a rescue named Bailey, who slept in my room and alerted me to any unusual sounds. The civil trial was shorter than the criminal one. Brennan presented evidence of ongoing trauma, documented therapy costs, career impacts from the stress and distraction. Kira's attorney argued that 14 months in jail was punishment enough, that bankrupting his client wouldn't undo what had happened. The jury awarded me $85,000 in damages. The judge added another $40,000 in punitive damages, specifically citing Kira's breach of trust and the calculated nature of her deception. Kira had been released from jail 3 months earlier and was working at a call center, the only job she could find with a criminal record. Her attorney argued she'd never be able to pay the judgment. Brennan filed paperwork to garnish her wages indefinitely. Every month, a portion of whatever Kira earned would come to me until the debt was paid. It would take years, possibly decades. That was the point. I wanted her to remember what she'd done every time she saw money taken from her paycheck. 2 years after everything fell apart, I ran into Craig's mother at a grocery store. She recognized me and approached carefully, asking if we could talk. I almost walked away, but something in her expression made me stay. She said Craig was out of jail and living in another state, working in construction and attending mandated therapy. She said he'd written me a letter of apology that his probation officer advised him not to send because it would violate the protective order. She asked if I'd be willing to read it if she forwarded it through my attorney. I told her no. I didn't need Craig's apology. I needed him to stay away from me for the rest of my life. She nodded and said she understood. Then she apologized for her son's actions and walked away. I heard about Kira occasionally through mutual acquaintances. She'd moved back in with her parents after her lease ended. She'd lost touch with most of her friends after the trial when they'd learned what she'd done. She'd started a blog about being wrongfully convicted, claiming she'd been scapegoated for a man's actions. The blog didn't get much traction. Most people who read her story and then looked up the court records realized she was lying. She'd been convicted because she'd done exactly what she was accused of. 3 years after the trials, I got a letter from Kira. It had been sent through my attorney per the protective order terms. She wrote that she'd finished probation and wanted to apologize for real this time. She said she'd been young and stupid and manipulated by Craig. She said she understood now that what she'd done was wrong. She asked if I could find it in my heart to forgive her. I didn't respond. Forgiveness wasn't something she got to request. It wasn't a transaction where she apologized and I absolved her. What she'd done had changed me permanently, made me question my judgment and struggle with trust. I'd rebuilt myself, but the foundation was different now, more guarded and less willing to give people the benefit of the doubt. That was the real cost of betrayal. Not the money or the legal proceedings, but the fundamental shift in how I moved through the world. 5 years after I'd woken up to someone trying my door handle, I was living a good life. I had a job I enjoyed and friends I trusted and a partner who understood my history. I had Bailey in my apartment with its cameras and smart locks. I had safety even if I didn't have the innocent trust I'd once possessed. On the anniversary of the night I'd installed the hidden camera, I treated myself to dinner at an expensive restaurant and raised a glass to the person I'd been who'd known something was wrong and refused to let anyone convince her otherwise. Thanks for watching till the end. Make sure to subscribe and like to not miss the next story.